Welcome to Sharp Sharp. Today is Wednesday, 13th of May, and this is the 7th edition of our groundbreaking, epic, fantastic podcast with me, Rob Rose from Currency News, and Zuks Majova from Scrolla.Africa. Zuks, how are you doing?
Good, Rob. Good, Rob. Another great week.
Not if you're Cyril Ramaphosa. It's been an epic week for the president and a potentially, landscape-altering week for the country. We had a constitutional court judgment that completely shook everything up and led many to fear that the president would resign.
Yeah, it's bad for the guy. I know how sorry I feel for him, Shem. I like Cyril. I've got views on Cyril.
I think we all have views on Cyril, and I think my views on Cyril don't necessarily accord with yours. But perhaps you should start at the beginning and just give people a recap of what this is about, because it's become this huge juggernaut of information over the past 5 years, and I think it's difficult to forget where it started. It's easy to forget where it started.
Yeah, amazing, Rob. I mean, this dates back to February 2020, when apparently there was a robbery at Cyril's home, which is actually a game farm, Phala Phala.
The fact is, he's a cattle trader, right? He trades buffalo. I mean, he's famous for this.
Well, he's a trader. That's what he says. He says, I'm a farmer. I've got animals. I sell cattle. I sell buffaloes, etc., which is quite normal. I have stock as well. I do sell. If someone goes home and buys a cow from my wife, we make 15,000 rand, which is a good thing. But we don't hide it under the couch.
So that's the thing. So Zuks, what happened here is that somebody arrived from Sudan, apparently, a Sudanese businessman.
Yeah.
While Cyril Ramaphosa was in Ethiopia at the AU summit. And he arrived and said, I think I want to buy one of your buffaloes. He arrives apparently with what we know is at least $580,000 in cash. I mean,
that's the money that was stolen, Rob. That's not all the money that was there.
So he arrives with this money and he says, I want to buy one of these buffaloes. So allegedly he buys a buffalo, leaves the money at the farm with one of the farm managers there, who then decides rather than keep it in the safe, he'll hide the money under a couch. Now, Zuks, have you ever done that with any of the money from your buffaloes, from your cattle?
No, Rob. What if the rats come through and run through the whole 15,000 rand? Yeah, that's the unusual thing about what actually happened in this particular
One
case.
of the many unusual things. I mean, they had a safe at this Phala Phala farm and they chose not to use it.
Unbelievable.
So then what happens is, Ramaphosa is now in Ethiopia. He asks Wally Ruda, who's the head of his presidential policing unit within the police. It's a special unit dedicated to looking after the president, to investigate what happened in this particular case. Now, I mean, this is where it goes badly awry. I think Wally Ruda then forms his own committee and he decides to investigate this by himself. He travels to Cape Town, he travels to Namibia, he interrogates people. There are pictures of people with handcuffs being interrogated, and not a single case has been opened with the police. I mean, is that unusual?
Well, he's a very interesting character, and I think it talks to just all these characters, these police guys in VIP protection, especially for the president, the deputy president. They tend to forget that they are police officers. They abuse the law. I mean, Wally is classic, that type of person. Obviously, we've got those guys who are beating people on the highway, protecting Mashatile. But you do get that tendency in the VIP protection that they tend to think that they are politicians themselves when they're actually police officers.
So in this case, one of Ramaphosa's enemies, Arthur Fraser, who was appointed in Jacob Zuma's government, then lays a criminal charge against Ramaphosa, and then it becomes public and the media goes crazy for it. They say, you have this massive weird situation on a farm where you had $580,000 in cash apparently stolen from your farm that was hidden in a couch. And it becomes, I suppose, a metaphor for the entire Ramaphosa presidency, money hidden in a couch. All his enemies, Julius Malema, when he was campaigning in the 2024 election, would always say, we might not have money, but at least we don't hide our money in the couch. It became a big stick with which to beat Ramaphosa.
It continues to be, Rob, even now, with the finding of the Constitutional Court, Ramaphosa might not end up being impeached successfully, but he's seriously compromised in the ANC. We know that he's not going to be a presidential candidate in the conference next year in December, but he would like to be able to select his own candidate. Now, he needs to be very powerful to be able to choose his own candidate at conference. He's increasingly becoming compromised now. And who knows what will happen when the election comes and the ANC does not perform. That could compromise him further, which will mean his potential candidate would seriously be compromised. unless he selects a very strong candidate like Patrice Motsepe, for instance.
But this entire situation has actually, like you say, it's tarred his legacy to some extent, because what happened is there then was an investigation and they produced a Section 89 panel report. That's what they called it, in which they said Ramaphosa has a serious case to answer. They said there were troubling, unsatisfactory elements in his explanation of how the money got into the couch. It asks the obvious questions like, why was this money not put in a bank? If you've given $580,000, why don't you just go to the bank the next day? Don't hide it in the couch. And then it says that he basically thrust himself into a situation where he had a conflict of interest between his official responsibilities and his personal business, essentially as a cattle trader. And then he said, this needs to go to an impeachment committee because he may be guilty of serious misconduct. Parliament then buries that report. It votes not to accept it. That, you have to say, at the time was like a fragile government of national unity. I suppose the fact that the Parliament voted not to accept this report, which would have meant an impeachment inquiry, was perhaps predictable.
Yeah, the timing of the entire panel investigation, Rob, was quite unusual. This thing happened in September. They concluded in November. Final voting came in just 2 weeks before the ANC elective conference, where Ramaphosa was seeking a second term. That's how the ANC MPs behaved. They look at the clock and they're like, okay, if there's an impeachment on this guy and we are going to conference, Zweli Mkhize is going to win. Zweli Mkhize, the former minister of health, was actually the one was contesting the presidency.
Who himself has a massive history of shady controversy involving digital vibes.
Oh yeah, well, increasingly people tend to forgive people for certain things like that, and it would appear that ANC delegates had forgiven him, because he actually ended up getting close to 45% of the conference, which was unbelievable for somebody who was recently involved in a massive scandal relating to COVID funding and all of that, when we know how difficult that situation was to have been involved in the stealing of COVID money. Whichever way you look at it, that should have angered society, but ANC delegates were very quick to forget that and forgive it.
So to bring us up to speed with what happened now, the EFF, Julius Malema's party, then takes this to court and says Parliament absolutely should have considered this report and there should have been an impeachment committee. And what happened last week in the Constitutional Court is the Constitutional Court essentially agreed. It said it was bad of Parliament. They didn't do their job in considering this report, and that we must have an impeachment committee into the president. Now, that's what happened. And, back in 2022, when this report came out, Ramaphosa himself had thought of resigning based on what was in this report. He'd scheduled a press conference. He was ready to resign, but he didn't. So this week, when the Constitutional Court decided that, many thought, the president might actually resign now, but he didn't this time. Zuks, why, what do you think has changed? Why would he have been ready to resign when the first report came out back in 2022? And right now, when the Constitutional Court now says this has to go to, an inquiry, what's different this time?
There's nothing different, Rob. Look, Ramaphosa is everybody's meal ticket in the ANC. What happened back then is exactly what is happening now. Those who stopped him at the time were people who were dependent on Ramaphosa to keep their positions of influence, etc. There were premiers, including the Eastern Cape Premier, Oscar Mabuyane, who is often in trouble, including some issues with his degrees from Fort Hare, which Ramaphosa continues to protect him, despite active investigation, obviously been linked to all sorts of scandals, including money missing for the funeral of Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela. He continues to be protected from that. He's now seeking a third term, and the conference had to be cancelled because they were cutting corners and rigging some of the processes. These are all the allegations that have gone to court, and that particular process of the election in the Eastern Cape was postponed. That tells you what type of person we're dealing with. But those people were protected. So a lot of people, Rob, wouldn't be in the positions that they are had it not been their association with Ramaphosa. So that's why they stopped it at the time. The likes of Gwede Mantashe, likes of Fikile Mbalula. Obviously, you wouldn't expect that Fikile Mbalula is going to be secretary of the ANC, but he is. There are so many people who are credible in the ANC who can easily become very distinguished secretaries of the ANC, and we were stuck with Fikile Mbalula. It's all about the slate that you are in, Rob, and the Ramaphosa slate has been very successful. Right now, it's the same situation. Those people whose meal depends on Ramaphosa being in office are going to defend him. They're going to make sure that he doesn't resign. Even if you look at the ministers who are there, a lot of the ministers are listed in the Zondo Commission with
for sure.
recommendation that they must be investigated. Deputy Minister of Water as well, also listed there. You got some appointments which are disturbing, Rob. I mean, if you look at Kumbutso Chabeni and you hear that she is minister in the presidency responsible for state security and intelligence, you're like, this is ridiculous. Who the hell is she? And in the history of intelligence, where does she come from? These are the disturbing things around Ramaphosa and his inability to appoint the right people. So it's those people who are going to make sure that it doesn't resign.
Just the sheer definitional contradiction of the word intelligence with some of these people seems confusing. But the thing is that, like you say, this is the party of, and I think the phrase that perhaps Batibile Dlamini made famous was the party of small Anyama skeletons.
Yeah.
Like every single person around the president, even who is the Reform and the New Dawn candidates, themselves has their own small Anyama skeleton. I mean, is there anyone without, like you say, he's everyone's meal ticket, but there's a lot to hide as well. And in his speech on Monday night, he said, "I will not resign." And he said, "Sure, there have been calls for me to resign, but that's from people like Julius Malema and perhaps predictable critics and commentary out there. But a lot of people have asked me not to resign, and that is from the people you mentioned, right?"
Not only them now. The game has changed. We now have a GNU. Another great achievement by Ramaphosa. One would say, if you consider where we were really going to hell, and now we've got a chance of once again redirecting our country towards growth and nation building. That's what the GNU is. So you'd assume that the people who are also counseling him that, Mr. President, don't resign, they are looking at the future of the GNU. A lot of people are looking at it. It's such a source of hope for us and investors, the world, the economy. It's well received, this GNU. So you would assume that calls are coming in from there. Even the DA, they are in a difficult situation. We are very interested in seeing how they are going to behave. First, with the motions of no confidence on the president.
So, I mean, the DA was interesting because last time the discussion was raised in Parliament, would you support an impeachment back in 2022? Would you accept this report? Helen Zille, who was then the DA's federal chair, said, "Well, we're not going to vote to depose the president that we basically elected through the GNU." Now you have a new DA slate of leaders. You have Jordan Hill-Lewis, who said this week, we will protect the Constitution. We'll do what we have to, which suggests a different tone in the DA. I mean, can the DA afford to vote purely on principle on this, or do they have to think politically? In which case, would their own electorate not punish them for not holding Ramaphosa accountable?
Well,
I mean, because the GNU stands to completely be dissolved should Ramaphosa not be there.
Oh, absolutely. There's no question about it. If he loses conference next year, the GNU it will officially be gone within a few weeks. There's no question about it. So Ramaphosa is the GNU guy. Actually, this is Ramaphosa's GNU. It's not even ANC GNU or Tripartite Alliance GNU. You can see the attitude of the Tripartite Alliance. SATU's attitude towards the Minister of Education, SACP is walking away, So this is all about Ramaphosa. Now, a lot of people have been saying, if you remember when the GNU started, there were ructions. They were like, we're going to walk out. There's no clearing of their house, all sorts of things. And I kept saying, they're not going to walk out because their advisors and those who are invested in the DA, those who are funding the DA, will say you cannot walk out of something as important as GNU over very minor issues, And right now, I can tell you now, they will vote to protect Ramaphosa.
So it's interesting because they say we'll vote and we'll protect the Constitution, but I suppose the issue comes down to in an impeachment inquiry. I mean, Parliament is very clear, when somebody should be impeached. The Constitution is clear. It says that impeachment is the correct kind of course for action for three specific things. If there's a serious violation of the constitutional law, if there's serious misconduct, or if there's an inability to kind of fulfill his functions. Now, the thing is, not every single thing you do is grounds for impeachment is serious misconduct. I mean, the reality here is Ramaphosa's own house was robbed. His farm was robbed. His money was stolen. Now, that's hardly him in bad faith doing something dodgy and laundering money. So would you say that that is serious misconduct? Would you say that there are definitely questions to be answered? I mean, how the hell is somebody, transmitting $580,000 at the very least into a country without informing, the Reserve Bank about that? But is this serious misconduct on Ramaphosa's part that would warrant impeachment? Do you think so?
From where I'm standing, Rob, there's not enough. There's not enough there to take out the head of state, which is why I'm convinced that the DA will vote with Ramaphosa. There's just not enough. Even if you look at that report of the panel, it's quite flimsy, Rob. A report that's going to take out a sitting president. You have nothing, no submission from the police. You've got no submission from the Reserve Bank about the status of those dollars. And the Reserve Bank subsequently issues its own report exonerating the guy. So you got no report from that. That report, Rob, is just not enough. But also, I think
Well, it did say he may be guilty of serious misconduct, but it's not a conclusion as such. It left it to the panel to say, let's subpoena people and examine this. But the point is this panel, himself having his own money stolen isn't necessarily an indication of an abuse of power, is it?
No, Rob. Look, I actually foresee that we're going to have this problem again, as it looks like we're going to have another billionaire president. The issue of whether...
Zukile Majova. Okay, I'm sorry. Is Willem Kiza? We might be talking Patrice Motsepe.
Talking about Patrice Motsepe. Now, the issue of a president in office doing business or getting some money, now there's a conflict of interest there. The Constitution does not allow a president, basically to be moonlighting. But in the case of Jacob Zuma, Jacques Paul in his book lists details how
he was on Ray Moodley's
a Durban businessman was paying Jacob Zuma while he was in office. That is the kind of person who should have been impeached.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we didn't.
I mean, the thing is, I think it's very clear at this point that there were many reasons why Jacob Zuma should not be there. And there were numerous instances of abuse of power with Jacob Zuma.
Exactly.
But with Ramaphosa, there are big questions over Phala Phala, and I think the questions that he hasn't yet answered, but it doesn't look like a serious enough abuse of power at this stage to warrant him being kept out. But that's also a very convenient conclusion. I mean, a lot of people would want to believe that because that if Ramaphosa goes, the kind of contrary scenario is you have, President Paul Mashatile coming in, which I think a lot of people are quite fearful of.
Well, you don't want that, Rob. I mean, we dodged a bullet with Didi Mabuza, and we were thinking, good Lord, if he becomes president.
Literally dodging bullets with Didi Mabuza.
And fortunately enough, it was Didi who brought us Cyril Ramaphosa, instead of Mamamposa and Dlamini Zuma. Now, we would have been in hell with that, So they say we must thank Didi, but also double thank him for not contesting to be president afterwards.
So in the end, we are essentially saying that we don't think this is serious enough based on what we do know for him to be impeached at this moment. There may be more that comes out in this inquiry, in which case, obviously we'll change our minds. But at the moment, it doesn't look like it's serious enough to warrant him actually being kicked out. That's correct, right? That's where we are.
That is absolutely correct, Rob. And I think all of us who are discussing the impeachment of Ramaphosa are actually jumping the gun, because the next step, we don't even have an impeachment committee to establish that committee. That committee, which is going to be made up of MPs from different political parties, a lot of them are going to be from the GNU. They will look at the panel report to make a decision whether there is sufficient evidence there to warrant a full impeachment process. So that might not happen, Rob.
So Ramaphosa has his own opportunity to kind of stress test the facts, because he's taking that report, that Section 89 panel report, on review now. So he's going to lodge his own scenario, his own sort of series of events, in which he will argue why the conclusions were wrong in law. So I suppose we'll have a version of events there that'll be almost his preliminary defense, right? That will tell us exactly what he's thinking on this.
Absolutely. And when that plays out, it will actually inform a lot of MPs about where they should stand. Look, this is going to be kicking the can further down the road, I think, beyond the elections, Rob, because you're looking at the time frame, there's just no time,
So if he doesn't get impeached, there absolutely should still be accountability for a situation where you have people arriving at your farm from Sudan who just bring in this mountain of cash undeclared, leave it at your house. And then the craziest part of potentially the story is he buys buffaloes from Phala Phala, from the president, and he leaves the buffaloes on the farm. That Sudanese businessman didn't claim the buffaloes. He never came back to get them. Doesn't that seem strange to you? if your farm, you sell your cows. If you still have those cows 2 years later, you'll think that's a bit odd, right?
Rob, I mean, people in the Eastern Cape are stealing cattle. One of our biggest problems is stock theft. Anyone who comes, I don't even accept people who send money via transfer. Come here, take your cattle, and leave with your cattle.
Yeah.
Because tomorrow, who knows? These things are sitting there in the field. I don't know if tomorrow they're going to come home. So my situation, being a small guy, is very different from the Ramaphosa situation.
But there should still be accountability for the way this all happened. The fact that General Wally Ruda conducted this investigation without once telling the cops about it. I mean, that is just staggering. There has to be some kind of accountability, even if it doesn't lead to impeachment.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think there will be accountability as far as that is concerned.
And then, I mean, the other thing is, okay, so if he doesn't get impeached, the question is, would it be such a tragedy if the president were not there? I mean, you talked about how he's been great for the country, and it's true that the GNU is pretty much a Ramaphosa creation. But, I mean, what has he actually done in the past couple of years? He's been around for a long time now as president. You seem quite positive on him, but Zuks, a lot of people are not. And I think justifiably, you look at policing and crime, one of the big issues in the country, and that's gone backwards in a manifest way. I mean, you've seen massive problems. You have, it's true, Eskom load shedding, sorted out. Transnet is sort of on the way to being sorted out. But there's this glacial pace at which everything happens. And as you pointed out, you have a bunch of terrible people that Ramaphosa surrounded himself with. Is his presidency, would it be such a loss if he were to leave?
I think people who are saying Ramaphosa has done nothing have not done an assessment of how much damage Jacob Zuma had done. Those people need to really look at the state capture report, and it's just a drop in the ocean. They have to look at what was happening at Eskom. People were going to work wearing a bulletproof vest, taking their kids to school, being escorted. The situation that was happening at Eskom with the stealing of the diesel, the coal, it was a mess. We wouldn't have sorted out a state capture and load shedding at Eskom. Then you go into Transnet. You go into the entire security and intelligence services, which he has taken into his office. The abuse of slush funds in intelligence was just unbelievable. We're talking millions. Those people had become a law unto themselves. The previous president, Jacob Zuma, was not even looking at that. In some cases, one would say that they were working to his advantage. As you know, he was able to get spy tapes, which were obtained illegally. There was, you know what I'm saying? So you have to look at what we were dealing with and where we were going. And Ramaphosa's mandate was clearly one, to stop that, two, build a system for this transition towards getting us back to nation building. In a very short span of time, he did stop state capture.
Stop the steal.
He's building a system now to allow South Africa to actually have a chance at recovering. And the major thing that he has done now after the election is to establish a GNU. And this really is an opportunity for the country to rebuild.
And I suppose the predominant factor is it's hard to argue the counterfactual. Had Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma taken over in 2017, had she won the ANC elective conference, then it would have been more perpetuation of the Jacob Zuma legacy. And that essentially had created, like you said, a gangster state. So the country might have been incredibly lost. We have had the Ramaphosa years when we've had, we haven't had really growth, GDP growth of more than 1%. We haven't been able to dent jobs. Unemployment is still more than 40% if you include people who've given up looking. So that hasn't really made a dent. But I suppose the counterfactual argument is, had Nkosazana Dlamini taken over, we might have been minus 5%. So that's it. But equally, Ramaphosa has not acted with the ferocity he said he would. He hasn't got rid of the people who are terrible. His promises of putting people in jail in the ANC when they've done wrongdoing hasn't happened. He hasn't even fired his police minister yet.
Yeah, Rob. I mean, remember, he didn't win the conference by 100%. He won by just 55%. So this guy has been trying to do things without all the power and all the support that you need. Rob, you cross certain lines, you get recalled. You must remember that one time an ANC NEC meeting sat and took a decision to recall a sitting president, Thabo Mbeki, and it did happen. They just sent the secretary to his house and said, "Comrade, you are being recalled." And they were able to recall him. So this is not something that is impossible. So if Ramaphosa steps on too many toes, he could get recalled. He knows that.
So you would give Ramaphosa his presidency what out of, would you give it a B? Would you give it sort of a 7 out of 10? Where would you put it?
Looking at the impossible situation that he was in and how much ground is made, I'll give him 80%.
80%. I think I would probably verge more on 65%. It's a passing grade.
It's still a passing grade.
It's not, he hasn't.
Especially now that the pass rate is just 30%.
Yes, well, we want to do much better than the pass rate. As a final point on this podcast today is we want to discuss something that I think relates to the fact that, we haven't been able to tackle crime. And that's a crazy story that we read this week on News 24 happening in KZN, where this major JSE listed construction company, Stefanuti Stocks, apparently paid out 8.5 million rand to somebody who was the boss of a construction mafia. Essentially, these guys who pitch up a construction site and says, give us protection money so that you can make good with the communities. And this guy who apparently had ruffled various construction sites for money was paid all this money for things that included what he deemed, he actually handed invoices to them for strategic security, to curb project delays and protect human lives. Is that not, Zuks, is that not blatant extortion?
Rob, you are listing this. I'm actually Ramaphosa's lawyer today, quite clearly. You are listing this as one of Ramaphosa's weaknesses in fighting crime. It's actually one of the victories. I keep saying, get the context that how bad was construction mafia before Dean McPherson, who comes from the DA, is now the Minister of Public Works under Ramaphosa's GNU. It was bad, Rob. It was everywhere, even in Mount Frere. You had bunch of thugs there calling themselves the local business forum. Every tender that comes out, they go and intimidate that person, want a cut of that tender. They get a cut of the tender. They don't do the job. They want to be given money and they're not going to do the job. Can you believe that? That's how bad construction mafia was. When Dean McPherson came into office, actually, he received a bullet as a warning. An entire minister receives a bullet. Can you believe this? It was really, really bad, Rob. Yes, it's still happening, Rob.
And it's happening in a bad way.
This is a disturbing story. Absolutely, very disturbing.
You see a situation where, this water project, this is for a water project happening in KZN.
Yeah.
And this is meant to benefit 50,000 households. And it's essentially extorted and held up because of a construction mafia. 50,000 households are going to benefit from this, and yet a small group of people, led by this one guy, Nkosi Malusi Zondi, wants to essentially take money for himself. I mean, that's never legitimate. Why has the police not been able to get on top of this?
Yeah, like I'm saying, Rob, construction mafia. Look, you allow these things to embed themselves into society. They become part of every single thing that you're doing. When you start to clean up, it takes time. There is now a definite cleanup, Rob. There's no question about it. I've noticed it. I've seen it. I've seen it even here in Joburg. There were people who would walk into a construction site one morning and demanded to take control of the site. They were arrested on the spot here in Johannesburg. So there is action being taken as opposed to where we're coming from, Rob.
What I find amazing about this case is Zondi himself gave a comment to Scrolla. He asked about this. He said, "I categorically reject any suggestion that I'm involved in extortion, criminality, or any unlawful business." He said the payments were for legitimate security and community liaison work carried out in a dangerous environment where workers, infrastructure, and lives needed protection. Now, this company had their own security service. I mean, it just sounds like bluster. I cannot believe people go out there and blatantly just say this kind of stuff when the evidence points to completely something else.
It's like getting a new house in a suburb in the south, and the security company says you need to get contract from us to protect your house. And then you're like, I'm still thinking about it. That immediate next day, there's robbery in your house.
No, basically our producer Dylan, it comes from the south. So that's hardcore, pal. He tells me the south, this kind of stuff happens the whole time, but this is okay, pal. It's okay. So I want to make a final point on this, Zuks, which I think all the stuff is still happening, but I think it's a testament to the media that we're still able to go out there and report on this. The fact that the story was out there, that News 24 reported on this essentially extortion of payment, is a testament to the fact that the reporters and the journalists are still able to report publicly on the stuff that happens and shine a light more. And that's really good for society, even if we haven't actually been able to tackle underlying issues of the crime. You'd agree with that, right?
Absolutely. Look, with everything that's happening in South Africa, and with serious crimes there, including taxi wars and all of that stuff that used to happen in northern Zululand with tensions politically, I've been to some of the deepest parts of northern Zululand, and Ngo where there was faction fighting going on there. People continue to respect journalists, even in this conflict situation. Even hitmen in the taxi rank, in the hostels, etc. When somebody walks in and they are a journalist, they tend to behave differently. That is very important for democracy. Otherwise, they could take us out, these guys, very easily.
That's a great way to end this particular podcast. Thanks for joining us on Sharp today. And remember, don't pay the construction mafia. And see you guys next week.